The Rogue is the first mercenary you get your hands on in Diablo 2, and while not as loved as the Act 2 mercenaries, they can still provide quite the mix of tools for some fun and interesting builds, albeit with a bit more expensive equipment than some of their competition. Today we'll cover the 5 variants I find the most interesting, though some are definitely far more useful than others, with weapons changing fairly drastically how you play with your ally. While this focuses on the high-end gear, expect a follow-up video covering alternative gear options if you really want to use the Rogue throughout your normal game journey. First up, we'll start with the most popular, the Faith Rogue. Usually used with the Cold Arrow base, the Faith Rogue is based around providing fanaticism both for herself as well as you, and is useful for the largest group of characters since it does okay damage, and also provides boosts for both your physical damage characters and your summons. The normal high-end equipment for this is Faith, Giant Skull, and Treachery. Usually you want to choose a relatively quick bow, but the fanaticism does help you have a little bit more flexibility with this. This is mainly to help her meet resistance goals, by the way, the Treachery that is, and attack speed breakpoints with some bows, and also the Giant Skull does help you back with your knockback skills, so it's nice. Next is the Wrath Rogue, and is a similar situation to the Faith Rogue, where it is generally a Cold Arrow Rogue designed to help amplify your character's damage output, although this is with curses rather than auras, so it's not always as useful for, say, a Summoner Necromancer, but it is still pretty useful for your physical damage dealers thanks to dropping Decrepify rather regularly, and it does help amplify your damage by doing so. Though it does sometimes get overridden by the Life Tap proc, it's still not a bad change-up. It's actually fairly frequent that you do keep the Decrepify on. The most common setup for this is Wrath, Giant Skull, and Treachery. You may notice a theme there. There are guides that recommend Delirium for this, but personally I'm not a huge fan of it since it fights with the other curses from time to time, but you may have different mileage depending on your luck. Speaking of Delirium though, there is a variant I do like it on, the Ice Rogue, a more control-oriented build using Ice, Delirium, and Treachery, and who very obviously is on a, well, Cold Rogue. The setup is designed to slow and control enemies and does an exceptional job with it. With the combination of Holy Freeze, Frost Novas, and Confuse, there's not many enemies that can really move quickly against this build. Though it is a bit slow against cold immunes, obviously, it's still not that bad and can deal with most areas of the game rather effectively, although you do, as with most Rogue allies, you want to keep them protected or bug them so they're not targeted by melee units. Obviously, since we have the first 3 as Cold Arrow Rogues, we've got to show the Fire Arrow Rogue a bit of love too with a couple more quirky builds. First up is the Rogue of Justice, the result of being challenged to make the Fire Arrow Rogue competitive, and one that is on par with the Ice Rogue in my opinion. Her high-end gear is Hand of Justice, Delirium, and Treachery. Some will probably say, but Phoenix reduces fire resist more. That's fine, but the general mods on Hand of Justice are just better for the Rogue, with a lot of your damage being physical, not really having any other source of life leech. Delirium also helps her control enemies, and Treachery keeps her alive. Not to mention the freeze and blind on Hand of Justice is great, and yes, you can put Hand of Justice in a bow despite the fact that it sounds like a melee weapon by its name. Last up, and also I generally put this on a Fire Rogue, is a more of a joke build that crops up a ton, and you'll see it a lot on a bunch of new Necromancers as well, but it really only does fit with one character type, and that is the Summoner. And it is the Thorns Rogue, or the Edgelord if you will, since she uses Edge, Giant Skull, and Bramble. Her main purpose in life is Thorns damage, which she runs at level 30 on the low end, all the way up to 36 on the high end due to the variances in Bramble. I usually use her on a Summon Necromancer whenever I'm playing around with it, since I can drop Amplify damage easily enough to make Thorns remotely useful. For a Druid Summoner, I would probably swap it out for a Delirium to allow for the Confuse to actually help you control crowds, since it wouldn't be fighting with your own curses as it does with the Necromancer. This one is kind of fun, but it is not really useful long term, and yes, I do use an Edge bow, even though it is not the optimal one. It's just because I want to. But anyway, if you found this useful or interesting, drop a like and stick around for gear alternatives for the Rogue, as well as other mercenary build guides coming soon.